Mother bear, carrying a lost human baby, begs to be let inside. What the man did next will shock you. Let us know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe if you're new to our channel. The snow fell in heavy sheets, blanketing the forest surrounding Outpost 37 in pristine white. Sergeant Elias Reed pulled his collar tighter around his neck, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. 3 years stationed at this remote military installation, and he'd never felt a winter quite this bitter. The temperature had plummeted to 20 below, and the wind cut through his thermal gear like icy daggers. Elias checked his watch, 2:17 a.m. 3 more hours until his watch ended. 3 more hours alone with nothing but the howling wind and the distant calls of wolves. He stamped his feet to keep the blood flowing and adjusted the rifle slung across his shoulder, scanning the tree line for the 100th time. The full moon cast long shadows across the snow, turning familiar shapes into menacing silhouettes. That's when he saw it, a flicker of movement at the edge of the clearing. Elias tensed, hand instinctively moving to his weapon. Something large was emerging from the trees, something that moved with purpose. His heart hammered against his ribs as the figure took shape in the moonlight, a bear. Not just any bear, an enormous grizzly. Its massive shoulders hunched against the driving snow, its fur crusted with ice. Elias had seen plenty of wildlife during his posting, but never a bear in the dead of winter. They should be hibernating. Something was wrong. Then he noticed what the bear carried in its jaws. Elias blinked hard, certain his eyes were playing tricks. The bear held something small and pale, something gripped with surprising gentleness. The soldier raised his rifle, peering through the scope for a better look. The blood drained from his face, a baby. A human baby, wrapped in what looked like the tattered remains of a blanket. God Almighty, Elias whispered, his voice nearly lost in the howling wind. The bear moved slowly, deliberately, its eyes never leaving Elias. There was no aggression in its posture, no predatory stalking. Instead, the massive creature seemed cautious, hesitant. It stopped 20 yards from the outpost fence, then carefully lowered its burden to the ground. Elias stood frozen, unable to process what he was witnessing. The bear huffed, clouds of steam billowing from its nostrils. Then it did something that made Elias question his sanity. It pushed the bundle forward with its snout, took 3 steps back, and sat on its haunches, waiting, watching. The baby wasn't moving. "Control, this is Reed at the north perimeter," Elias radioed, his voice shaking. "I need backup now. And bring the medic." "Copy that." "What's the situation?" came the crackled response. How could he possibly explain this? "Just come fast." Elias made a decision that went against every protocol, every instinct for self-preservation. He unlatched the gate and stepped out into the snow. The bear watched him, unmoving, as he approached the bundle. Every step felt like miles, his boots crunching through the frozen crust of snow. When he reached the baby, Elias dropped to his knees. The infant's lips were blue, skin pale as the moonlight. But when he pressed trembling fingers to the tiny neck, he felt it, a pulse. Weak, thready, but there. "You're alive," he whispered, gently lifting the baby. It couldn't be more than a few months old, a little girl, her eyelashes frosted with ice. The bear made a sound then, not a growl or a roar, but a deep, rumbling whine that seemed to vibrate the very air. Elias looked up, finding himself mere yards from one of nature's most efficient predators. Yet fear had given way to confusion, to wonder. The bear's eyes held something he couldn't name. Something that seemed impossible understanding. Lights flooded the perimeter as the outpost sprang to life. Doors slammed. Men shouted. The bear's head swiveled toward the commotion, but it didn't retreat. Elias cradled the baby against his chest, trying to transfer what little warmth he could through his thick gloves. "Reed, get back inside." Captain Lowell's voice cut through the night. "We have the bear in our sights." "No," Elias shouted, turning to face his approaching comrades. "Hold your fire. Hold your fire." 6 soldiers approached in tactical formation, weapons raised. The medic, Lieutenant Sanchez, crouched at the rear of the group. "Have you lost your mind?" Lowell hissed. "Back away from that animal." "The bear brought this baby here," Elias said, knowing how insane it sounded. "It brought her to us for help." "That's impossible," Lowell said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. The bear remained seated, its breath coming in cloudy bursts, eyes moving between the humans and the bundle in Elias's arms. "Sanchez," Elias called to the medic. "This baby needs help. She's barely breathing." The young lieutenant hesitated, looking from Elias to the bear to the captain. "Go," Lowell finally ordered, keeping his rifle trained on the bear. "The rest of us will cover you." Sanchez darted forward, medical bag clutched to his chest. When he reached Elias, he immediately unwrapped the baby with practiced hands. "Severe hypothermia," he muttered, checking vital signs. "We need to get her inside. Now." Throughout this exchange, the bear watched, patient, alert, showing no signs of aggression. As Sanchez rewrapped the baby and prepared to move her, the bear let out another of those strange, plaintive sounds. "It's waiting to see what we do with her," Elias realized aloud. "That's crazy talk," Lowell said, but his finger had moved away from the trigger. "Is it?" Elias challenged. "Look at it, Captain. It's not acting like a wild animal. It brought this child to us. It could have killed her, should have killed her by all natural laws. Instead, it carried her through miles of snow to the only human outpost for 50 miles. As if understanding, the bear slowly rose to its feet. Everyone tensed, but it made no move to attack. Instead, it dipped its massive head in what almost looked like a nod, then turned toward the forest. "Wait," Elias called out, surprising even himself. The bear paused, looking back over its shoulder. "Thank you," Elias said softly. For a moment, brief but undeniable, their eyes met in perfect understanding. Then the bear lumbered into the darkness, disappearing among the trees as silently as it had appeared. Inside the outpost infirmary, organized chaos erupted as Sanchez worked to save the baby's life, heating blankets, for fluids, careful monitoring. The child's body temperature had dropped dangerously low, but she was young. Resilient. "She's responding," Sanchez announced after an hour of treatment. "Heart rate stabilizing. I think she's going to make it." Elias sat nearby, unable to tear himself away. "How did she get out there? Where did she come from?" "Search and rescue can head out at first light," Leal said. "If there were parents somewhere in those woods." The unspoken reality hung heavy in the air. No one could survive a night like this, exposed to the elements. "The bear saved her," Elias said quietly. "Somehow, it knew." "That's not possible," Leal insisted, but with less conviction than before. "Then how do you explain what we all saw?" Elias challenged. No one had an answer. Dawn broke, clear and cold. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape transformed into crystalline beauty. Search and rescue teams fanned out from the outpost, following the bear's tracks back through the forest. They didn't have to go far. 2 miles in, they found the remains of a campsite, a tent collapsed under the weight of snow, a long-dead fire pit, and tracks. Human tracks, partially filled with snow, led away from the camp, circling in confused patterns before disappearing. "Looks like someone got lost in the storm," the team leader reported back. "Adult female, based on the boot size. Probably the mother." "And the bear found the baby?" Elias mused. "We don't know that," Leal cautioned, but the evidence told a different story. Bear tracks circling the collapsed tent, following the human prints for a distance, then veering off toward the outpost, carrying a new, smaller burden. As the day progressed, the baby grew stronger, her cheeks flushed with healthy color, her tiny hands grasping at the blankets. Wildlife authorities and child services were notified, and arrangements were made for her transport to the nearest hospital when she was stable enough to travel. That night, Elias stood watch again, his eyes drawn repeatedly to the dark line of trees. The forest seemed different now, less threatening, more mysterious. Somewhere out there, a bear moved through the shadows. A bear that had defied every natural instinct to save a human child. "Why?" Elias whispered to the night. "Why did you do it?" Only the wind answered, carrying the distant echo of something that might have been a growl, or might have been a lullaby, hummed in a language older than words. Inside, the baby slept peacefully, saved by an impossible act of compassion from a creature she would never remember, but whose story would follow her for the rest of her days. The story of the night a bear carried her through the snow and delivered her into the arms of humanity. Days passed. The baby, temporarily named Aurora by the soldiers, had been transported to Northridge Regional Hospital, 70 miles south of the outpost. Elias volunteered to accompany her on the medical transport, unable to sever the invisible thread that now connected them. In the sterile confines of the pediatric ward, Aurora thrived under the constant care of nurses and doctors, amazed by her resilience. Medical tests revealed no permanent damage from her exposure. A miracle, the attending physician called it. No frostbite, no brain damage, just a healthy 3-month-old girl with no one to claim her. "There's no record of her," Social Services Representative Marissa Chen explained to Elias when she arrived. "No missing baby reports matching her description. No abandoned campsite registered with Forest Services. It's like she appeared out of nowhere." Elias sat beside Aurora's hospital crib, watching her tiny fingers curl around his calloused index finger. "Her mother's body?" he asked softly. "They're still searching," Marissa said. "The storm covered everything. If she's out there, she didn't need to finish the sentence. After nearly a week, there would be nothing left to find." "What happens to her now?" Elias asked, unable to tear his gaze from Aurora's peaceful face. "Foster care, then adoption if no family comes forward." Marissa studied Elias carefully. "You've grown attached." It wasn't a question. Elias nodded slowly. "I can't explain it," he admitted. "I feel responsible for her. Like I was meant to be there that night." "Just like the bear was meant to find her?" Marissa asked. There was no mockery in her tone, just gentle curiosity. News of the miracle bear had spread quickly, first through official channels, then leaking to local media. Wildlife experts debated possibilities. A female who had recently lost cubs might have responded to the baby's cries, they suggested. Others pointed to rare but documented cases of cross-species adoption in the animal kingdom. A few dismissed the story entirely as a fabrication or misunderstanding. Only those who had been there that night knew the truth. Something extraordinary had happened in those woods, something that defied rational explanation. "I keep dreaming about it," Elias confessed. "I see the bear standing over a cradle made of branches and leaves, watching over her, protecting her." "The mind creates narratives to make sense of the inexplicable," Marissa said, though she sounded uncertain. "Maybe," Elias conceded. "Or maybe there are things in this world we're not meant to understand." Later that evening, as Elias prepared to return to the outpost, the hospital room television caught his attention. A breaking news banner crawled across the bottom of the screen. "Wildlife authorities track unusually behaving grizzly near military outpost." His heart stuttered. "Turn that up," he urged the nurse checking Aurora's vitals. The reporter stood bundled against the cold, snow-covered trees forming a backdrop behind her. "Wildlife officials are tracking what they believe to be the same bear that allegedly brought an abandoned infant to military personnel last week. The bear has been spotted repeatedly near the outpost, exhibiting what experts call highly unusual behavior patterns." The camera cut to footage, grainy and distant, but unmistakable. The massive grizzly stood at the tree line, watching the outpost. Not approaching. Not retreating. Just watching. Officials are debating whether to tranquilize and relocate the animal, as its behavior suggests potential habituation to humans, which can be dangerous. "No," Elias whispered. The nurse glanced at him. "You don't think they should move it?" "They don't understand," Elias said, already reaching for his coat. "It's not dangerous. It's checking on her." Aurora stirred in her sleep, making tiny noises of contentment. Elias leaned down and gently kissed her forehead. "I'll be back," he promised. Then he hurried from the room. Captain L was not pleased to see Elias return unannounced, especially when he heard the reason. "You want us to do what?" he demanded, staring at Elias as if he'd lost his mind. "Just hold off the wildlife authorities," Elias pleaded. "Give me one night. I need to understand what's happening." "You need to understand why a wild predator is stalking our outpost?" Eliel's voice dripped with skepticism. "There's nothing to understand, Reed. It's an animal that's lost its fear of humans, that makes it dangerous. With all due respect, sir, that bear had plenty of opportunities to harm us the other night. It didn't. It saved a child's life." Eliel's expression softened slightly. He'd been there too. He'd seen what Elias had seen. Impossible as it seemed. One night, he finally conceded. "But you take a team, you stay in radio contact, and if that bear so much as looks at you wrong, you get out of there." "Clear?" "Crystal clear, sir." "Thank you." That night, under a sky scattered with stars, Elias led a small team into the forest. Specialist Jang carried tranquilizer guns just in case. Corporal Diaz brought thermal imaging equipment. Lieutenant Sanchez, who had helped save Aurora, volunteered to join them, carrying medical supplies. They followed the bear's tracks through the pristine snow, massive paw prints that told the story of an animal circling, watching, waiting. 2 miles in, the tracks veered eastward, away from the original campsite. "It's leading somewhere," Elias murmured. "Or we're following it into a trap," Jang replied nervously. "If it wanted to hurt us, it would have done it already," Elias countered. The tracks led them deeper into the forest, where the trees grew so densely that they had to use flashlights despite the moonlight. Eventually, they reached a small clearing and stopped short. Before them stood an ancient hollow tree, its massive trunk split open like a doorway. Around it, the snow had been cleared in a perfect circle, as if swept away by enormous paws. "What is this place?" Diaz whispered. Elias approached slowly, his heart pounding. As he neared the hollow tree, he detected a faint sound, a low, rumbling breath. He signaled for the others to stop and raised his flashlight beam. Inside the hollow, curled in a nest of leaves and fur, lay the bear. Its massive head lifted at their approach, eyes reflecting the light like twin flames. But it made no move to attack, no threatening gestures. Instead, it shifted slightly, revealing what lay beside it, a woman, unconscious but breathing, wrapped in what appeared to be a park ranger's jacket. Her body was nestled against the bear's fur for warmth. "My God," Sanchez breathed. "She's alive." The bear watched them, unmoving, as they approached cautiously. The woman's face was pale, her dark hair matted with dried blood from a gash on her temple, but her chest rose and fell steadily. "It's her," Elias realized. "Aurora's mother." The bear huffed softly, as if in agreement. Sanchez knelt beside the woman, checking her vitals. "Hypothermia, concussion, possible internal injuries, but she's stable." The bear's body heat. He shook his head in disbelief. "It kept her alive." "Just like it tried to save the baby," Elias said, meeting the bear's gaze. "But it knew it couldn't save them both, so it brought Aurora to us." The bear blinked slowly, an almost human gesture of acknowledgement. "We need to get her to a hospital," Sanchez said urgently. "What about?" Diaz gestured toward the bear. The massive creature shifted its weight, moving away from the woman, creating space for the humans to approach. It backed toward the entrance of the hollow tree, watching intently as they prepared a stretcher. "It understands," Elias said softly. "It's letting us take her." As they carefully moved the woman onto the stretcher, Elias noticed something clutched in her hand, a small, leather-bound journal. He gently pried it from her fingers and tucked it into his pocket. Perhaps it would provide answers. With the woman secured, they began the difficult journey back to the outpost. The bear followed at a distance, a shadow moving parallel to their path, visible only as a darker shape against the night. At the edge of the forest, where the trees gave way to the cleared perimeter around the outpost, the bear stopped. Elias handed his end of the stretcher to Jiang and approached the massive creature one last time. "You saved them both," he said quietly. "Why?" The bear's eyes seemed to hold ancient wisdom, an intelligence that transcended species. It made that same rumbling sound, deep in its chest, then slowly turned and disappeared into the forest depths. Karen Reynolds opened her eyes to blinding white light and the steady beep of hospital monitors. Confusion gave way to panic as memory flooded back. "My baby," she gasped, trying to sit up despite the pain that lanced through her ribs. "She's safe," a deep voice assured her. Karen turned to find a soldier sitting beside her bed, tall, weathered, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. "Who are you?" she demanded. "Where's Aurora?" The soldier's eyebrows rose slightly. "You named her Aurora?" "Of course I named her. She's my daughter." Karen's voice broke. "Please, where is she?" "She's here in the hospital, 2 floors up. Perfect health. The nurses have been calling her Aurora too." Strange coincidence. Karen relaxed slightly, tears of relief streaming down her face. "It's not a coincidence. It's what I whispered to her every night, sleep well under the northern lights, my little Aurora." She studied the soldier more carefully. "You found us?" "Not exactly." The soldier hesitated. "My name is Sergeant Elias Reed. I was on watch at Outpost 37 6 nights ago when your daughter was brought to us." Brought to you? By who? I don't understand. Elias took a deep breath. This is going to sound impossible, but she was brought to us by a grizzly bear. Karen stared at him, then let out a small, startled laugh that turned into a sob. You won't believe me either. Try me. Karen's eyes grew distant. We were camping. Just a short overnight trip. My husband, Thomas, is stationed overseas, and I wanted pictures of Aurora under the northern lights to send him. The storm came out of nowhere. Our tent collapsed. I was trying to hike out with Aurora when I slipped on some ice and hit my head. She touched the bandage wrapped around her forehead. I thought we were going to die there. She drew a shaky breath. Then I saw it, this enormous bear standing over us. I was terrified, sure it would kill us both. But it didn't. It just watched us. I was so cold I couldn't even hold Aurora properly anymore. I thought I was hallucinating when the bear lay down next to us, creating a windbreak with its body. Elias nodded encouragingly. Go on. I must have passed out. When I woke up, Aurora was gone, and I thought, her voice broke, I thought the bear had taken her. Eaten her. I tried to get up, to follow, but I couldn't move. Then the bear came back, without Aurora. It dragged me to that hollow tree, and I was too weak to fight. I thought it was taking me to its den to finish me off. But it was protecting you, Elias said softly. Karen nodded, fresh tears spilling. It brought me a ranger's jacket it must have found somewhere. It lay beside me, keeping me warm. Somehow, I knew Aurora was safe. I can't explain it, I just knew. Elias reached into his pocket and pulled out the leather journal. We found this with you. Karen took it with trembling hands. My field journal. I'm a wildlife biologist. I was documenting denning behaviors of black bears for my doctorate research. A sad smile touched her lips. Thomas always said my bear obsession would get me into trouble. Turns out it saved our lives. There's something else you should know, Elias said. The bear that saved you, it's been coming back to the outpost. Wildlife authorities want to relocate it. Alarm flashed across Karen's face. No. They can't do that. It's not just any bear, it's the Midnight Sentinel. The what? It's what the local indigenous people call her, a legendary grizzly that protects lost travelers. Most scientists dismiss it as folklore, but there have been stories for generations about a massive female grizzly appearing during storms to guide people to safety. I never believed it myself until... She trailed off, shaking her head. This sounds crazy, doesn't it? A week ago, I would have said yes, Elias admitted. Now? I'm not so sure. A soft knock interrupted them. A nurse entered, pushing a small portable crib. Someone's been very fussy without her mama, she announced cheerfully. Karen's face transformed, radiant with joy as Aurora was placed in her arms. The baby gurgled happily, tiny hands reaching for her mother's face. Hello, my little northern light, Karen whispered, pressing kisses to Aurora's forehead. Elias stood quietly, preparing to give them privacy, when Karen looked up at him, tears shining in her eyes. Thank you, she said simply. For believing. For understanding. I just followed her lead, Elias replied, nodding toward Aurora. She knew who to trust. As he stepped into the hallway, his phone buzzed with a text from Captain L. Wildlife authorities postponed. Bear disappeared. No current tracks within 50 miles of outpost. Like it vanished into thin air. Elias smiled to himself. The Midnight Sentinel had completed her mission. Her charges were safe, reunited. Whatever mysterious force had guided her, instinct, intelligence, or something more mystical, had served its purpose. Outside the hospital window, snow began to fall again, soft and gentle. Somewhere in the vast wilderness, a bear moved through the gathering dusk, her massive paws leaving tracks that would soon be covered, her story becoming legend with each retelling. The guardian of the forest who had carried a child through the storm and delivered her into waiting arms. 2 weeks later, as February's grip on the northern wilderness began to loosen slightly, Elias found himself driving Karen and Aurora back to Outpost 37. The hospital had finally discharged Karen, her concussion healed and her strength returning day by day. Aurora, oblivious to her brush with death, thrived under her mother's care, growing chubbier and more alert with each passing day. "You don't have to do this," Karen said, watching the snow-covered landscape pass outside the passenger window. "I'm sure the military could arrange transport for us to get home." "I want to," Elias replied simply. He had visited them daily in the hospital, bringing small gifts for Aurora and news from the outpost. A friendship had formed between them, built on the foundation of their shared extraordinary experience. "Besides," he added with a small smile, "I still need to write up my official report, and there are details only you can provide." Karen studied his profile, noting the way his eyes constantly scanned the tree line as they drove. She knew he wasn't looking for threats. "You're hoping to see her again," she said softly. Elias didn't pretend to misunderstand. "Wouldn't you?" "Every day." Karen looked down at Aurora, sleeping peacefully in her car seat. "I owe her everything." The outpost appeared ahead, a cluster of utilitarian buildings surrounded by the razor wire fence that had once seemed so necessary for protection against the wilderness beyond. Now, Elias wondered who was truly protecting whom. Captain L met them at the gate, his usual stern expression softened somewhat by the presence of the baby. He had arranged temporary quarters for Karen and Aurora while they waited for transport to Anchorage, where Karen's sister lived. "The Wildlife Service people want to talk to you," L told Karen after they'd settled in. "They've been hounding us for details about the bear." "What have you told them?" she asked, tensing visibly. "Only what's in the official report, that a bear was spotted near an abandoned campsite and later approached the outpost exhibiting unusual behavior." L's eyes flickered to Elias. "We omitted certain interpretations." "Thank you," Karen said. "I'd like to speak with them. My research could help contextualize what happened." Later that afternoon, 2 representatives from the Wildlife Service arrived, Dr. James Morton, a graying man with wire-rimmed glasses and a skeptical frown, and his younger colleague, Dr. Lila Patel, whose eyes shone with barely contained excitement. "Mrs. Reynolds," Dr. Morton began formally, "I understand you're a wildlife biologist specializing in ursine behavior?" "That's right," Karen replied, Aurora cradled against her shoulder. "My dissertation focuses on denning patterns and maternal behaviors in Alaska's black bear population." "Then perhaps you can explain to us," Morton continued, "how a grizzly bear, a species known for its aggression toward humans, supposedly rescued both you and your infant during a blizzard?" The skepticism in his voice was unmistakable. Karen exchanged a glance with Elias, who stood nearby, arms crossed defensively. "I can tell you what I experienced," Karen said carefully. "I can't explain it in terms that would satisfy conventional behavioral science." "Try us," Dr. Patel encouraged, earning a disapproving look from her senior colleague. Karen took a deep breath and recounted her story: the sudden storm, her fall, the appearance of the bear, and her gradual realization that the animal was protecting rather than threatening them. As she spoke, Dr. Patel took rapid notes while Morton's frown deepened. "And you believe this bear deliberately brought your child to the military outpost for help?" Morton asked when she finished. "I do. Mrs. Reynolds, with all due respect to your training, that interpretation requires us to attribute human-level reasoning capabilities to a wild animal. Have you considered that your concussion might have affected your perception of events?" Before Karen could respond, Elias stepped forward. "I didn't have a concussion, Dr. Morton, and I saw that bear gently place a baby on the ground and wait until we took her. 6 other military personnel witnessed the same thing." Morton removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Sergeant Reed, I don't doubt that you saw a bear with an infant. What I question is the intention you're attributing to the animal. It's far more likely that the bear found the baby, perhaps triggered some confused maternal instinct, then abandoned it when it encountered humans. Then why did it bring the baby specifically to our outpost?" Elias challenged. "Why not just leave her in the woods? And why did it return to the mother and keep her warm for days until we found her?" Dr. Patel couldn't contain herself any longer. "There are documented cases of cross-species nurturing behaviors," she interjected eagerly. In 2006, a lioness in Kenya adopted oryx calves on multiple occasions. In India, a leopard adopted a baby monkey after killing its mother. These behaviors defy conventional explanations but have been verified repeatedly. Anomalies, Morton dismissed. Hormonal imbalances or confusion of instincts. Or something we don't understand yet, Karen suggested quietly. "Dr. Morton, have you ever heard local stories about the Midnight Sentinel?" Morton's expression shifted subtly. "Folktales. Legends. Scientifically irrelevant. Yet the Inuit and Athabascan peoples have described a protective female grizzly in this region for generations," Karen pressed. "Always a solitary female, unusually large, appearing during storms to guide lost travelers. The stories go back hundreds of years." "Anthropomorphization of natural phenomena," Morton said dismissively. "Common in pre-scientific cultures. Or observations we've been too arrogant to take seriously," Karen countered. Aurora stirred against her shoulder, making small fussing noises. "The indigenous peoples of this region have lived alongside bears for thousands of years. Maybe they understand something we don't." Dr. Patel was practically vibrating with excitement. "What if we set up camera traps? If this bear really is exhibiting unique behaviors, documenting it could revolutionize our understanding of ursine cognition." Morton shot her a quelling look. "Our job is to manage wildlife-human interactions, Dr. Patel, not chase fairy tales. This bear, whatever its behavior, has become habituated to humans. That makes it dangerous and unpredictable." "She saved my child," Karen said, her voice hardening. "She saved me. She's not a threat." "You can't know that," Morton insisted. "Next time, its behavior could be very different." The meeting ended at an impasse, with Morton promising further assessment of the situation and Patel slipping Karen her card with a whispered offer to discuss the case off the record. That night, unable to sleep, Karen paced the small quarters with Aurora in her arms. The baby was restless too, as if sensing her mother's agitation. A soft knock at the door revealed Elias, looking equally sleepless. "You heard?" he asked quietly. Karen nodded. They've authorized a tracking team. If they find her? I know. Elias's jaw tightened. They'll tranquilize her at best. Shoot her if she shows any aggression. She won't understand what's happening, Karen said, anguish in her voice. She'll think they're threatening her, or me and Aurora. Elias hesitated, then spoke the words they'd both been thinking. We could try to find her first. Warn her away somehow. You'd risk your career for her? Yes. Elias's certainty surprised even himself. What about you? You're still recovering. Karen looked down at Aurora, now sleeping peacefully against her chest. She deserves a chance to grow up knowing the truth about who saved her, about the connection between all living things. She met Elias's gaze steadily. I'm in. Before dawn, they slipped away from the outpost. Karen had mapped the most likely locations for the bear based on her knowledge of grizzly territory and behavior patterns. Aurora, bundled against the cold, slept in a carrier strapped to Elias's chest, freeing Karen to navigate through the gradually lightening forest. If Morton's team comes this way, they'll follow the main game trails, Karen explained as they forged through deeper snow, taking a more difficult route. Bears are smarter. They create their own paths that humans rarely notice. The rising sun painted the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. Their breath fogged in the crisp morning air as they climbed higher, following subtle signs only Karen's trained eye could detect. A broken branch here, a tuft of fur there, depressions in the snow that most would overlook. She's been through here recently, Karen murmured, examining marks on a tree trunk. Within the last day. They pressed on, the terrain growing steeper. Aurora woke and began to fuss, hungry and disoriented by the strange surroundings. They paused in the shelter of a massive pine while Karen nursed her, Elias standing guard, scanning their surroundings constantly. We're being watched, he said suddenly, his voice low. Karen froze, following his gaze to a ridge above them. For a moment, she saw nothing. Then, a shadow moved against the white backdrop, massive and deliberate. It's her, Karen breathed. The bear stood silhouetted against the morning sky, her massive form unmistakable. She watched them for long moments, perfectly still except for the cloud of breath around her muzzle. She recognizes us, Elias said, wonder in his voice. Slowly, deliberately, the bear turned and moved along the ridge, pausing to look back at them. She wants us to follow, Karen said quickly, bundling Aurora back into her wrappings. They struggled up the steep incline, following the bear's tracks through increasingly rugged terrain. Just when Elias began to worry about Karen's strength, they crested a rise and found themselves looking down into a sheltered valley, untouched by human presence. A frozen stream wound through stands of ancient pines, and nestled against a southern slope was the dark opening of a cave. The bear stood at the entrance, watching them approach. As they drew near, Elias felt none of the fear that would normally accompany such a close encounter with a grizzly. Instead, there was only a profound sense of connection, of purpose. She's denning here, Karen whispered. This is her sanctuary. The bear huffed softly, her breath clouding in the cold air. Then, with deliberate movements, she retreated into the cave. What now? Elias asked. Now, we warn her, Karen replied, slipping off her backpack. From within, she produced a small packet of powerful-smelling herbs, an Athabascan mixture she'd acquired from a local elder years ago during her research. This scent means danger to bears. They avoid areas marked with it, she explained. Her plan was simple, they would create a perimeter of the scent around the valley, A warning that would keep the bear in her sanctuary, away from the tracking teams that would soon be searching the forest. "Will it work?" Elias asked dubiously. "It has to," Karen said simply. "It's her only chance." They worked methodically, placing the herb bundles at strategic points around the valley's access routes. As they completed their circuit, Elias noticed fresh tracks in the snow, human tracks, following the same path they had taken hours earlier. "They're already looking for her," he said grimly. Karen nodded, determination hardening her features. "Then we need to lead them away. Make them think she's gone in another direction." What followed was an elaborate deception, with Karen and Elias creating false bear tracks leading away from the sanctuary toward the mountains to the east, rugged terrain that would take days to search thoroughly. They used branches to mimic the pattern of a bear's movement, careful to make the deception convincing to trained eyes. As they worked, Aurora watched from her carrier, occasionally making soft cooing sounds that seemed to float across the still winter air. From the distance came an answering sound, a low, rumbling call that wasn't quite a growl. "She's saying goodbye," Karen said softly, tears freezing on her cheeks. By mid-afternoon, they heard the distant sounds of the tracking team, voices carrying across the valley, the mechanical whine of snowmobiles. It was time to return to the outpost and face the consequences of their unauthorized absence. "Will we ever see her again?" Elias asked as they took one last look at the peaceful valley. "I don't know," Karen admitted. "But she'll always be watching over us in her way." As if in answer, a single powerful roar echoed from the distant cave, not a threat but a declaration. A promise. Spring came early that year, the snow retreating up the mountainsides as green crept across the awakening forest. Karen and Aurora had settled in Anchorage, where Karen had accepted a research position with the University of Alaska, focusing on bear cognition and communication. Her paper on the Midnight Sentinel phenomenon had been met with skepticism in mainstream scientific circles, but had garnered intense interest from a smaller group of researchers dedicated to interspecies communication. Elias had faced disciplinary action for his unauthorized excursion but had weathered it with the quiet dignity that characterized him. His commanding officers, recognizing the unusual circumstances and his otherwise spotless record, had limited his punishment to a formal reprimand. Now, as April painted the world in fresh colors, Elias drove the familiar road to Anchorage, anticipation building with each mile. His transfer request had finally been approved. He would be joining the military's Environmental Research Division based just outside the city, allowing him to continue his career while remaining close to Karen and Aurora. The tracking teams had never found the bear. After weeks of fruitless searching, Wildlife Services had declared that the animal had likely migrated to more remote territory, exactly as Karen and Elias had intended them to believe. Karen met him at her modest home on the outskirts of the city, Aurora toddling unsteadily beside her. At 8 months old, she was growing rapidly, her dark eyes bright with curiosity and intelligence. "Look who's walking already," Elias said with a broad smile, kneeling to Aurora's level. The baby studied him solemnly for a moment, then broke into a delighted grin, arms reaching for him. Something in Elias's chest expanded painfully at the simple gesture of trust. "She remembers you," Karen said softly. Later, as darkness fell and Aurora slept peacefully in her crib, Karen and Elias sat on the porch, watching the stars emerge above the distant mountains. "I got a call from Dr. Patel today," Karen said, breaking a comfortable silence. "There have been sightings." Elias didn't need to ask, of what or where. Near the old denning site, Karen said. Local hunters reported seeing an unusually large female grizzly with, she paused, emotion catching in her throat. With 2 cubs. She has a family now, Elias said, something like joy spreading through him. Karen nodded. Life finds a way, even after loss, even after hardship. She moved forward, just like they had. The unspoken connection between them hung in the air, tenuous but growing stronger with each passing day. They had been bound together by extraordinary circumstances, by a miracle neither could fully explain but both fully believed in. I've been thinking, Elias said carefully, about what happens next. For all of us. Karen's hand found his in the darkness. Me too. Inside, Aurora stirred in her sleep, making soft sounds of contentment. Above the mountains, the northern lights began their ethereal dance, green and purple ribbons unfurling across the star-studded sky. And somewhere in the vast wilderness, a mother bear led her cubs through the awakening forest, teaching them to fish in newly thawed streams, to find the sweetest berries, to climb trees and dig for roots. Teaching them to survive in a world that could be harsh and unforgiving. But perhaps she was also teaching them something else, something passed down through generations of her kind. A wisdom the local people had always understood but modern humans had forgotten. A wisdom about connection, about compassion that transcended species. About the profound bonds that could form between all living things when they recognized in each other the same fundamental desire, to protect, to nurture, to love. The Midnight Sentinel's legacy lived on. In her cubs. In the child she had saved. And in the hearts of those who had witnessed a miracle in the snow and chosen to believe in something greater than themselves. In a world that often seemed determined to separate humans from nature, to create divisions and boundaries, they had glimpsed a deeper truth, that we are all, in the end, part of the same magnificent story. Bound together by invisible threads of compassion and understanding that, once recognized, could never truly be broken. 1 year later, the small gathering at Karen's lakeside cabin buzzed with quiet conversation. Aurora, now a sturdy toddler of 20 months, tottered between guests, offering each a solemn stare before breaking into delighted giggles. Her dark curls bounced as she moved, so like her mother's that several guests commented on the resemblance. She has your eyes, though, Dr. Lila Patel remarked to Elias, who stood nearby, watching the child with undisguised adoration. That's what everyone says, he acknowledged with a smile. Though both knew there was no biological connection, the bond between them had been forged in more extraordinary circumstances. The occasion was both professional and personal, the release of Karen's groundbreaking book, The Wisdom of Bears. Rethinking Animal Cognition Through Indigenous Knowledge and Modern Science. It had already generated controversy in academic circles, with traditionalists dismissing her incorporation of indigenous perspectives as unscientific, while a growing number of researchers praised her willingness to challenge conventional boundaries. Among the guests mingling on the wide wooden deck overlooking the lake were several local Athabascan elders, who had contributed their knowledge to Karen's research. Elder Sarah Bay, her weathered face creased with smile lines, watched Aurora with particular interest. "That child carries a powerful spirit," she commented to Karen. Touched by the guardian. Karen nodded, having learned not to dismiss such observations. "She dreams about bears," she confided. "She's never afraid in her dreams. Just connected." Sarah nodded, unsurprised. The old stories say, those saved by the Midnight Sentinel carry her protection forever. They become bridges between worlds. Nearby, Elias chatted with Captain L, now Major L, who had made the journey despite his initial skepticism about the entire affair. Time and reflection had softened his perspective, especially after similar incidents had been documented in the region over the past year. 3 more cases, L confirmed in a low voice. Hikers separated from their group during a blizzard found their way to safety following what they described as a large shadow. A photographer, stranded when his vehicle broke down, kept warm through the night by something massive and warm that disappeared at dawn. A child wandered away from a fishing camp, returned unharmed, babbling about the big bear that showed me the way home. And wildlife services? Elias asked, tension evident in his voice. Changed their approach after Dr. Patel's presentation to the Oversight Committee. They're monitoring, not hunting. Your friend made quite the impression with those camera trap photos. Elias smiled, remembering Patel's excitement when she'd captured the first clear images of the Midnight Sentinel with her cubs, massive twins with distinctive white patches on their chests, exactly like their mother. The photos had been taken near a remote thermal spring where the bear family had established a new territory, far from human encroachment, but still within the legendary guardian's traditional range. As twilight approached, the guests gathered for the highlight of the evening, a storytelling session led by the elders. Aurora sat in Elias's lap, unusually still, her eyes wide as Elder Thomas Kuho began the ancient tale of how the Great Bear became protector of lost travelers. In the time before time, he began, his deep voice resonating in the gathering darkness. When animals and humans spoke the same language, there lived a woman known for her compassion. In the harshest winter anyone could remember, she found a bear cub freezing beside its dead mother. Though her own children were hungry, she shared her food with the cub, carried it home, wrapped in her own coat. Aurora leaned forward, transfixed, as if recognizing something in the story. The cub grew strong under her care. And when spring came, the woman prepared to return it to the forest. But that night, the Great Spirit visited her dreams, saying, "You have shown compassion when others would have shown only self-interest. From this day forward, the spirit of protection will pass through the generations of this bear's line. They will recognize the lost, the vulnerable, the children of your children's children, and guide them to safety." As the elder spoke, a hushed reverence fell over the gathering. Even the most scientifically minded guests found themselves affected by the ancient words, spoken under a sky now scattered with stars. Many generations have passed, Elder Kuho continued, but still she walks our forests, the Midnight Sentinel. Not every bear carries this spirit. But when the need is greatest, when compassion must transcend the boundaries between species, she appears. When he finished, silence held for several long moments, broken only by the gentle lapping of lake water against the shore and the distant call of a nightbird. Then Aurora spoke, her childish voice clear in the stillness. "Bear helped me." Karen and Elias exchanged startled glances. Though they had kept photos of the Midnight Sentinel in their home and spoken often of her, they had never explicitly told Aurora about her own rescue, assuming she had been too young to remember. "Yes, little one," Elder Sarah said gently. "The bear helped you, and now you carry her spirit within you." Later, after the guests had departed and Aurora slept peacefully in her bed, Karen and Elias stood on the deck, watching the northern lights shimmer across the vast Alaskan sky. "Do you think she actually remembers?" Elias asked softly. Karen leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "I don't know. Maybe it's something deeper than memory, something cellular, spiritual even. She smiled at the thought of how much her scientific perspective had evolved. A year ago, I would have dismissed that idea completely. A lot has changed in a year, Elias agreed, his arm tightening around her waist. The simple gold band on his left hand caught the starlight, a match to the one Karen wore, exchanged in a quiet ceremony by the lake just 2 months earlier. I keep thinking about what Sarah said about Aurora being a bridge between worlds, Karen murmured, her voice holding a mixture of wonder and concern. What does that mean for her future? It means she'll grow up understanding something most people never grasp, that the boundaries we create between species, between human and wild, are largely illusions, Elias said, having given it considerable thought over the past year, especially as he watched Aurora grow. She'll see connections where others see separation. Karen nodded, finding comfort in his perspective. I want to take her to the observation platform next month, she said. When the bears come to fish at the falls. Dr. Patel says the sentinel and her cubs have been spotted there. Do you think she'll recognize Aurora? I'm certain of it. Summer brought long, golden days to Alaska, the forests lush with new growth, the rivers teeming with salmon making their ancient journey upstream. The observation platform at Kenai Falls had been specially modified, Dr. Patel's influence again, to allow for extended wildlife viewing while minimizing human impact on the bears' natural behavior. Karen and Elias arrived early, before the usual tourist groups, Aurora strapped securely in a carrier on Elias's back. Now approaching her 2nd birthday, she remained unusually serene in nature, pointing out birds and animals with quiet delight rather than the boisterous excitement typical of toddlers. Remember, even if we see her, we maintain distance, Karen reminded everyone as they settled on the platform. Dr. Patel nodded, adjusting her camera equipment while the small team of graduate students she had brought along murmured in agreement. The morning passed quietly, with several black bears appearing at the falls to fish, but no sign of the distinctive grizzly they hoped to observe. Aurora remained patient, occasionally pointing to the bears and whispering, "Not her," with such certainty that Dr. Patel raised an eyebrow at Karen. "She seems very sure," the researcher commented. "She is," Karen replied simply. As noon approached and the platform began to fill with tourists, Elias suggested they break for lunch. They moved to a quieter section of the observation area, spreading a blanket where Aurora could stretch her legs while they ate sandwiches. That's when they heard the distinctive huffing sound, a mother bear warning her cubs to stay close. The platform fell silent as every head turned toward the far side of the falls. There she stood, unmistakable even at a distance. The midnight sentinel had grown even larger since they had last seen her, her fur now a rich brown streaked with silver around her massive head. Behind her, scrambling over rocks with adolescent clumsiness, came her cubs, no longer small, but not yet fully grown, their white chest patches visible even from afar. "Magnificent," Dr. Patel breathed, her camera clicking rapidly. The bear paused, lifting her head as if scenting the air. Then, with deliberate movements that sent ripples of tension through the watching tourists, she began moving along the riverbank directly toward the observation platform. A park ranger stepped forward nervously. "Folks, remain calm and quiet. This is unusual behavior, but we're perfectly safe on the platform." Karen felt her heart race as the massive grizzly approached, her cubs following closely. Aurora had gone completely still, her small face solemn with concentration. The sentinel stopped directly across from their section of the platform, perhaps 30 feet away, close enough that Karen could see the intelligence in her dark eyes, the scars on her muzzle from years of survival in the wilderness. For long moments, the bear simply stood there, watching. Then Aurora spoke, her voice carrying clearly in the hushed silence. "Thank you for finding me." Several tourists gasped. The bear's ears flicked forward at the sound of the child's voice. Slowly, deliberately, she rose onto her hind legs, a posture that would normally signal aggression but somehow conveyed something entirely different in this context. She stood over 8 feet tall, magnificent and powerful, her gaze fixed not on the crowd of humans, but on one small child. Then she lowered herself, huffed softly to her cubs, and led them to a prime fishing spot directly below the platform. There, in full view of the astonished onlookers, she proceeded to teach her young how to catch the leaping salmon, remaining close enough that every human could observe, but never making any threatening movement. "She's putting on a show," one tourist whispered in amazement. "No," Karen corrected gently. "She's sharing knowledge." For nearly an hour, they watched. The bear family remained, the mother occasionally glancing up at Aurora, who watched with unwavering attention. No one on the platform moved or spoke loudly, sensing they were witnessing something extraordinary. Finally, with her cubs fed and the summer sun beginning its slow descent, the sentinel gathered her family before departing. She rose again briefly onto her hind legs, her gaze meeting Aurora's one last time. Then she dropped back to all fours and led her cubs into the forest, disappearing as silently as she had arrived. The platform erupted in excited conversation, tourists and researchers alike struggling to process what they had witnessed. Dr. Patel was practically vibrating with excitement, reviewing the hundreds of photos she had taken, already forming hypotheses about interspecies recognition and memory. But Aurora, her small face peaceful, simply said, "She remembers me." "Yes," Elias agreed, lifting her into his arms, "and you remember her." Years passed. Aurora grew from a solemn toddler into a thoughtful child with an uncanny connection to the natural world. By her 10th birthday, she had accompanied Karen on research expeditions throughout Alaska, demonstrating an intuitive understanding of animal behavior that seasoned biologists found remarkable. The legend of the Midnight Sentinel grew too, bolstered by Dr. Patel's groundbreaking studies and the increasing number of documented encounters. Wildlife tourism in the region boomed, though Karen worked tirelessly with local authorities to ensure that the bear's habitat remained protected, that human encroachment was minimized. Elias transitioned from military service to a role with the National Park Service, combining his leadership skills with his newfound passion for conservation. Together, he and Karen created an educational center focused on indigenous knowledge and modern wildlife management, a bridge between worlds, just as Aurora herself had been. The Sentinel's cubs matured and established territories of their own. Wildlife cameras occasionally captured images of them guiding lost hikers back to trails, standing guard over injured animals until help arrived, exhibiting behaviors that defied conventional understanding of bear cognition. On Aurora's 16th birthday, as summer painted the Alaskan landscape in vibrant greens and golds, she asked for a special gift: to visit the valley where the Sentinel had once denayed, where Elias and Karen had risked everything to protect her. "Are you sure?" Karen asked, concern evident in her voice. The Sentinel herself had not been spotted for nearly 2 years, not unusual for an aging bear but worrying nonetheless. "I'm sure," Aurora replied with quiet certainty. "It's time." The three of them made the journey together, following trails that had become more defined over the years but still remained largely untouched by human development, a testament to the conservation efforts that had grown from their extraordinary story. The valley looked much as it had 16 years earlier, though summer had replaced winter's starkness with lush vegetation. The cave entrance was partially obscured now by flowering bushes, the stream running clear and cold across sun-warmed rocks. Aurora moved ahead of her parents, approaching the cave with reverent steps. She carried a small bundle, herbs gathered with Elder Sarah's guidance, traditional offerings of respect. "Do you think she's still alive?" Elias asked Karen softly as they watched their daughter. "Bears can live 30 years or more in protected areas," Karen replied, "and she was special." Aurora placed her offering at the cave entrance, then stepped back, waiting. Minutes passed in silence, broken only by birdsong and the gentle rustle of leaves in the summer breeze. Then, movement. Not from the cave but from the ridge above. A massive bear, her fur now more silver than brown, made her way carefully down the slope. Age had slowed her movements but had not diminished her majesty, her essential power. The midnight sentinel had returned to her ancient denning ground. Aurora stood perfectly still as the bear approached, no fear in her posture, only reverence and recognition. When only a few yards separated them, she spoke in the Athabascan language Elder Sarah had taught her, words of gratitude, of acknowledgement, of connection. The bear stopped, studying her with eyes that held the wisdom of decades in the wilderness. Then, slowly, she sat on her haunches, a posture that mirrored precisely her position 16 years earlier when she had first brought a tiny, freezing baby to the outpost fence. For what felt like an eternity, human and bear regarded each other, the child who had been saved and the guardian who had saved her, their lives forever intertwined by a moment of impossible compassion. No words were exchanged. None were needed. In the silent communication between them flowed understanding deeper than language, recognition of the bonds that connect all living things, acknowledgement of the wisdom that transcends species. Finally, the bear rose, her movements showing the stiffness of age. She approached Aurora closer than she had ever come to a human since that night in the storm. When less than an arm's length separated them, she lowered her massive head and exhaled softly, her breath warm against Aurora's face. Aurora closed her eyes, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered again, this time in English. "For my life. For everything." The bear huffed gently, then turned and made her way back up the ridge, pausing at the top to look back one last time. Her silhouette against the summer sky burned itself into Aurora's memory, powerful, ancient, a guardian spirit in physical form. Then she was gone, disappearing into the forest that had been her home for decades. That was goodbye, wasn't it? Aurora asked when her parents joined her, their own faces wet with tears. Karen nodded, unable to speak past the emotion tightening her throat. "Not forever," Elias said, placing a gentle hand on Aurora's shoulder. "Her cubs carry her spirit. Her legacy continues through them, just as your life carries forward the miracle of that night." Aurora nodded, understanding flowing through her with a clarity that belied her years. "We're connected," she said softly. "Always have been. Always will be." As they made their way back through the summer forest, the wind stirred the trees, whispering secrets only the wild could understand. As they made their way back through the summer forest, Aurora walked with new purpose. The guardian had recognized her, had confirmed what she had always felt, that her life had been spared for a reason. She would continue the work her parents had begun, bridging human and wild, ancient wisdom and modern science. And somewhere in the vast Alaskan wilderness, the cubs of the Midnight Sentinel, now adults with cubs of their own, continued their ancient patrol, guiding the lost, protecting the vulnerable, maintaining the sacred connection between human and wild that their remarkable mother had embodied. The story, like the forest itself, would continue to grow, to evolve, to inspire generations yet unborn, a testament to the extraordinary moment when a bear carried a child through the snow and changed the lives of all who witnessed it forever. 10 years later, the northern lights danced across the midnight sky, ribbons of green and purple illuminating the snow-covered landscape below. Aurora, now 26 and a respected wildlife biologist in her own right, stood at the edge of the familiar clearing. The conservation center she and her parents had established had grown into an internationally recognized research facility, dedicated to understanding the profound connections between humans and wildlife. Tonight, however, Aurora stood alone, drawn to this place by a feeling she couldn't explain, a pull, a certainty that had awakened her from a deep sleep filled with dreams of dark forests and protective shadows. The news had come 3 days earlier. Tracking data from one of the research collars had gone stationary, high in the mountain range where the oldest of the Sentinel's daughters had established her territory. When the research team investigated, they found her, massive, silver-tinged, peaceful in her final rest. The last direct offspring of the Midnight Sentinel had passed, leaving only grandcubs and great-grandcubs to carry on the extraordinary lineage. Aurora had felt the loss like a physical pain, though the rational part of her mind reminded her that the bear had lived a full life, nearly 20 years in the wilderness, raising multiple cubs of her own, all exhibiting the same protective behaviors that had made their grandmother legendary. Now, as the aurora borealis shimmered overhead, the celestial phenomenon that had given her both her name and her life, she felt tears freezing on her cheeks. She had come to say goodbye, not just to one bear, but to an era. With each passing year, the direct connection to her own miracle grew more distant, the story becoming legend, even as the scientific papers she and her mother published brought hard data to support what had once seemed impossible. "I won't forget," she whispered to the night, her breath clouding in the bitter cold. "None of us will." She closed her eyes, remembering that final meeting with the Sentinel a decade earlier, the warm breath on her face, the ancient wisdom in those dark eyes. She had felt something pass between them then, something beyond words, beyond human understanding. A blessing, perhaps. A passing of purpose. The sound came so softly at first that Aurora thought she had imagined it, a gentle huffing, carried on the night wind. Her eyes flew open, scanning the tree line, heart-pounding. There, at the edge of the clearing, stood 3 bears, young adults by their size, each bearing the distinctive white chest patch that marked the Sentinel's lineage. They watched her silently, making no move to approach or retreat, their breath visible in the frigid air. Behind them, more shapes emerged from the darkness, 5, then 8, then a dozen bears of varying ages, all with the same marking, all watching with the same intelligent awareness. The descendants of the Midnight Sentinel had gathered, drawn by some instinct or knowledge beyond human comprehension. Aurora sank to her knees in the snow, overwhelmed by emotion. She had studied these bears for years, tracked their movements, documented their behaviors, yet nothing had prepared her for this moment, this gathering, this acknowledgement. "You know," she whispered through her tears. "Somehow, you all know." As if in answer, the largest of the bears rose briefly onto his hind legs, silhouetted against the dancing lights above. Then, with perfect synchronicity, the entire group turned and melted back into the forest, disappearing as silently as they had come. Aurora remained kneeling in the snow long after they had gone, tears flowing freely now, grief mingled with awe, loss with profound gratitude. In that moment, she understood with perfect clarity what her life's work truly was. Not just to study these extraordinary animals, not just to protect their habitat, but to keep alive the understanding they had shown her. That compassion transcends species. That wisdom wears many forms. That miracles happen, not just in ancient legends, but in the cold, clear reality of a winter night.